You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
It's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks. This is episode 197. I'm your co-host Mark Newbold, and joining me today is a man who has more acolytes than Darth Zippy. It's Mark Mulcaster. How you doing, man?
I'm very well. My Sith horde is sat here in silence, watching me, waiting and going to react on every single word I say. Isn't that right, Sith horde?
Insert tumbleweed sound effect. Fantastic. Wow, the atmosphere is cut it with a brick.
Palpable.
Wonderful. Palpatinable. How's things?
Yeah, things are good, my friend. Just cracking on, doing stuff. No events this weekend for me, just a quiet one, which is quite nice. How about yourself?
Same, yeah, no events this weekend. Obviously, one's coming up over the next few weeks. LFCC is coming in fast, and there's a few other events hopefully percolating that we can talk about soon enough. But yeah, it's all coming together really well. Site's bobbing along. Phantom Tracks TV is really busy, which is nice. Listeners and viewers will be able to go and look at our reaction chat from this week, talking about the first two episodes of the show. That's up on the podcast and Phantom TV, so you've got access to both. Yeah, all Acolyte, I think, at the moment is how it feels. Unless you're a vintage Hasbro collector, in which case there's a new HasLab just been announced. Other than that, very much an Acolyte world, I would say, at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that seems to be the buzz, which I think is only positive. I mean, obviously, like we slightly alluded to on Reaction Chat, some of the feedback and I guess fan reactions has been negative, but not in a constructive way. So we're not going to really talk about that too much. Just generally, there's been a nice buzz about it and relatively positive. So for those who've watched it, it seems to be positive. For those who haven't watched it, seem to say, oh, I'm not going to watch it because, and it's like, whatever. Anyhow, With that in mind, let's talk about something very important. Have you had anything new into your collection this week?
So the first thing that came in was last year, Lucasfilm's 50th anniversary. I got the jacket, which I've not worn very often, but it's really, really sweet. And then a friend of mine, Dan, had got the T-shirt, the corresponding T-shirt, black T-shirt, gold logo, Lucasfilm 50th. So we struck a deal and I bought the T-shirt thinking, I know what will happen. I'll wear it once and it'll end up in a box with all the other T-shirts. No, I've pretty much lived in this thing. It's a really, really nice T-shirt. So that was the first really cool piece. And then from a friend in the States, we've all got little quirks and focuses of things that we collect. So one of the things that I've started getting, and I've had some for, actually, when I looked at it, quite a few years, but I'd got some of the invites to the Lucasfilm 4th of July picnic, ILM's October Halloween party. So I found somebody online, a friend, who'd got some duplicates and a little bit of discussion on how we're going to make it work. And then they turned up the other day and they're really, really, really nice. So I've ended up getting into a little run of, I think I've got like 10 of these 4th of July invites out of, I think, 44 parties they've done over the years since they started it. And the same for the ILM October Halloween party. I think I've got half a dozen of them. So they're just cool. I mean, they're little snapshots of time. They're all different. They're all very quirky and different. Also got another couple of the Lucasfilm Christmas cards. Nice. So I think I'm not missing that many now, going back to about 96. So I've got a fairly good run of those. And then a few other little bits and bobs. Some patches came. There's always comics coming in. Fairly, regular stuff. But those little Lucasfilm bits were the standouts. What about yourself?
So this week, funny enough, actually, probably spurred on slightly by the Acolyte, I've been trying to pick up and fill a couple of publishing gaps that I seem to have missed a couple of High Republic books that I've listened to, but I haven't brought. And also a couple, The Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and in fact, Rise of Skywalker, Japanese cinema programs.
Very nice.
So those came through. So those are cool. The covers always seem a little bit cool. It's the artwork design that really is, which does it. So
the way they lay it out is really nice.
Yeah, exactly. They tend to do some really interesting stuff. So yeah, those have come, flick through those, they look amazing, and now they will sit in a drawer probably for another 20 years.
That's how it is, isn't it, Sad? That's literally how it goes, isn't it?
Exactly. You kind of look at it and then you file it away, and then it's not until you have a big sort out or move around and stuff, and you're like, oh, I forgot I had that, which is always quite nice. because it's like rebuying stuff without actually having to spend anything. So that's at least how I've justified it to Karen.
Exactly. It's nice until you think you've not bought it or forget you have bought it, and then you buy it again, and then you're going to put it away, and then you see it's already in the collection, and then you silently scream.
Yeah, because that's the irony, is that you tend to put it in the same place as you put the original, and you're like, you twat. Why didn't I just check?
I know, but we don't, do we?
No, we never do.
But one thing we are going to check is what's happening with the Acolyte. So Amanda Stenberg and Leslye Headland were discussing the show, obviously, just as the episode comes out, piece that went on to The Hollywood Reporter. And talking with The Hollywood Reporter, they discussed loads of stuff. But one of the things they did touch on was they couldn't believe that the twist didn't come out. And Amanda did mention it. She said, I totally thought it was going to leak earlier, like a lot earlier. And then Leslye Headland says, I think that line could also apply to the rest of the season as well, not just the promotional materials. So they're saying how that promotional stuff pre-show did get the message of what the thing was about out there, but it didn't give away the fact that Mae and Osha are not the same person, they're different people. So what do you think of that? I mean, it doesn't feel, now that we know, it doesn't feel like the craziest reveal, but it's not obvious at all because we now know. So, of course, it's obvious now we know it. It wasn't obvious until that reveal came about. What do you think about that? How well they kept that secret?
I mean, I think we've kind of said all along, really, and this may explain why nothing was shared at Celebration last year, is that they've kept things under wraps. You know, I've not really seen a huge amount of stuff, which is cool. I much prefer it. And, you know, it's been almost like a media blackout in some respects.
Yeah.
They've done a really good job to kind of button stuff down. The thing is, as with everything, people's thoughts and speculation suddenly becomes, oh yeah, I knew about that all along, when you delve into the darker side of the web. But it was odd, to be fair. Like, I'm just thinking about my reaction to when I saw it. I wasn't like, oh my God. Admittedly, obviously, like I said in reaction chat, you have a slight misdirect in the first episode where you think, is Osha having these kind of really dark dreams? Or maybe she did kill the Jedi and actually she's kind of doing some kind of like force walk type thing like Luke does in The Last Jedi. But it wasn't such a big jump, especially in Star Wars, for there to be like a twin sister. It wasn't played to be a big reveal. So it was kind of, oh, okay, cool. Not only has she got a sister, but the sister's still alive. I mean, maybe it's just because we don't have any familiarity with characters. They could have said that Mae actually was named Mark, 10 years ago. And that probably would have been, you probably gone, okay. And I think maybe some of the actual critical thoughts I've heard people say, like in terms of like, not like just outright negative, but constructive criticism. They seem to kill a lot of Jedi in the first couple of episodes, which we have no relation to. We have no kind of familiarity with. And so therefore, has the impact been lost because we don't know who these characters are? We haven't lived with them. We don't know them. We haven't struck up a bit of fondness for the character, like, Carrie-Anne Moss's character, for example. And it might be the same with this, I mean, maybe it's also the fact that this isn't the big story. This is just the first little hurdle for what is going to be a much bigger, much more interesting story that will develop over the next few episodes.
It's a bit like season 3 of Mando, when we all assumed that the whole season would be getting back to Mandalore and getting in the waters. And that was done by the 3rd episode. But I think with this, the twin thing feels like a big reveal. But actually, when you look at the show, it's kind of quite organic. And when you look back at it, it's, the one's got a tattoo on the forehead, actually got longer hair than Mae's got, so there are enough differences that if you're paying attention, you'd pick up on it, that they are different people. But cosmetically, essentially, cosmetic differences. But nevertheless, I like the fact that you've seen both the sisters in the 2nd episode in Mae's mind, and they're played by twins, but they're not identical twins. They actually look slightly different. My wife's a twin, so her and her sister look different. So that's quite interesting as well. I like the way that they did that to delineate, especially the younger characters. But I think it bodes really well for later, as you say, later in the season, because that reveal is out there now, and there's a few of the little elements, as you say, that have progressed really quickly. We know the 4 Jedi already; 2 of them are dead. By the time we get to the 4th one, which is as much as anybody's seen, you're only halfway through the season. It really feels like it's, oh, wow, it's really going to get cooking now. So, and they've teed it up so nicely. If it doesn't really go for it, you could say if it doesn't pan out and deliver something different and exciting, you might look and go, oh, they kind of dropped the ball. But at the moment, it's absolutely teed up between the sticks. It's looking really, really good.
This is Charles Soule. You're listening to Fantha Tracks.
There's two ways you can approach a new era of Star Wars or any kind of franchise storytelling. Is you turn everything up on its head from the get-go. You put the viewer completely off kilter, or I won't say ease them in, but there's like enough, like we said, there's enough familiarity with the galaxy and how it's all working and the aesthetic, but it feels like we're still in Star Wars without it necessarily feeling like we're in the Skywalker saga era. But then you can't play safe for the whole season. You've got to do some big swings. And we've seen this with Star Wars in the past. You do a big swing in the first couple of episodes, and as you said, nothing then really changes for the rest of the season. So it doesn't feel like it's gone anywhere or it's held the audience. Maybe this is a different way of doing it, which may actually pay off.
The episode had 4.8, or the two episodes had 4.8 million views in their first day of availability on Disney Plus, which is the biggest series premiere of 2024. Fantastic figures when you stack that up against what we talked about on Reaction Chat, the Rotten Tomatoes numbers, which from memory I think was 91% critics and 27% audience, which is ridiculous. I think both have gone up now. I think audience is 30% as we speak, and critics is up to 93. Makes a mockery of that audience figure because obviously it's been review bombed. By way of comparison, they said the exact first day viewership total isn't available for Ahsoka, which is the previous series, live action series, but they did report that it took 5 days to reach 14 million views, which is an average of 2.8 million views a day, which is less than the Acolyte. Now, that's averaging out 5 days into equal blocks. You'd probably assume that Ahsoka would have had far more viewers on its first day than it did on its 5th day, let's say. But nevertheless, impressive numbers for Acolyte. You said something really interesting earlier in that there's lots of critical word out there, but not much constructive critical opinion. What they're saying doesn't stack up. Oh, there's fires in space. Yeah, there's always been fires in space in Star Wars. That level of stupid. So even if you're criticising it, you've got to have watched it to be able to criticise it to any level other than, oh, it's stupid, it's woke, and I don't like it because girls are in it sort of thing.
No, you're completely right. You've got to watch it. And then if you want to criticize for whatever reason, the plot, the pacing, the story logic, or whatever it is, you have an issue with. But this is it. People are still talking about what's his face is saying about Anakin blew up the Death Star, Matt. And that's
Charlie Barnett, yeah.
And give the guy a break. Everybody probably says they're a Star Wars fan on some level, and probably Charlie has seen Star Wars. He's probably like a super casual person. He's probably watched it when he was a kid, and that's about it. He's not a fan as such. Doesn't mean he doesn't like it. Just means that he's just got a couple of things confused. And you're under the hot lights of doing press junkets, and you say something by accident, and people hang you out to dry for it. That's sad in itself. All those fans will probably still queue up for a celebration autograph or shake his hand if he was at a local convention. So what's it matter?
Completely that. I say I did a roundtable with him and Daphne Keane in February. He is a fan. He was rabbiting on about how much he loved the Ewoks and he knows all this stuff. So he's definitely a fan. I just think it was in the moment, talking about stuff and spitballing things with people. And I just think he said Anakin without thinking, because goodness knows, back in 1999, loads of people thought that little kid in The Phantom Menace was Luke. Easy mistake. Nothing really, I don't think, to make much bones about. And then the final piece on Acolyte for today, so far anyway. So Leslye Headland talks about the show's budget with the New York Times. Practical sets obviously over stagecraft for the most part. Huge construction in a brand new era. So everything's got to be built from the ground up. You can't use blasters from Star Wars. You can't use ships from The Last Jedi. It's all brand new, completely starting from scratch. The price tag is accordingly hefty, 180 million for 8 episodes, which breaks down to 22.5 million an episode. That's less than a lot of your House of the Dragon episodes and your Lord of the Rings stuff, WandaVision, Stranger Things. It's less than them, but it's still hefty. I'm sure that's going to be used as a brickbat to attack Star Wars for whatever reason they want to attack it. But when you think 5 years ago, season 1 of The Mandalorian cost 120 million for 8 episodes, 15 million an episode. Costs go up over time. That was a stagecraft focused show, whereas this is much more practical. Does it surprise you that the budget is that high, or when you see it on the screen and think, wow, I mean, we both were at the premiere, so we saw it on the big screen and it worked really well on the big screen. It's a movie on television, really, isn't it?
Andor, too many A's in the Star Wars franchise at the moment.
There is.
Andor, that was what, $250 million?
220, I think.
It's not the highest costing show, but also I think there's a big difference. When I looked at this, and you go, well, that's pretty much, I'd think, practical sets just about all the way through, and it shows. There's depth and there's texture there, which we don't tend to get with Mandalorian. How good is the volume in terms of creating environments versus being able to create these immersive environments, but with the practical sets? Which ones actually feel slightly more authentic? I've started to pick up critical thoughts about the fact that, the Mandalorian, it looks impressive, but there's not much depth there. It feels very much like, well, pretty much like the prequels in some respects. Like it's very green screen kind of heavy, but it's not obviously green screen, it's a volume, which really is a very classy green screen and rear projection, really. If you boil it down to its simplest form, that's kind of what it is. And maybe that's where potentially, if there's a season 4, or especially if it's going to be a Mandalorian Grogu film, that'll be interesting to see how much they utilize the volume there. But I think they should be kind of looking at shows like the Acolyte and Andor and actually kind of reminding themselves that practical sets offers so much more. Like you look at, the towns that they go through in the Acolyte map, and they're just filled with people, people walking around in foreground. They walk past them. They're not like deep background, clearly on volume. They're there. There's interaction. There's creatures and stuff. So it has a way of showing the money's been well spent.
I mean, obviously there's room for both because Ahsoka and Kenobi and Mando and shows like that are done in large part on the volume. But Andor and Acolyte, for example, made here in the UK, are mostly set, and they both work and they all live in the same world. But do you think there's room for both, especially if budgets become a concern? Obviously, Disney want to watch their pennies now. As a consequence, then Lucasfilm will have to watch their pennies, and there's processes to tighten that up. It seemed that when Force Awakens came out and they spent, I don't know how much they spent on Force Awakens, high 200s on Force Awakens, creating this new era. I think they were all in the ballpark of that sort of cost. And that's understood because big budget blockbuster movies do cost that kind of money, like the Jurassics did, and so many of the Marvels are 200 plus. So it is the benchmark for that sort of high-end filmmaking. But nevertheless, if Disney can adopt the Lucas logic of let's bring this in cheaper, let's work the technology, make it better. So do you think there's going to be a sort of an inverse snobbery about it? Because not that long ago, Stagecraft was blowing our minds and we couldn't get enough of it. But now, when you see the reality of an Acolyte or an Andor, that tangible, you know the actor could kick that stone on the floor and it's not going to go 10 foot and hit a glass screen. It's just going to keep going until it hits an extra. And then there's a lawsuit, which probably don't end well, but there you go. But, there's the reality to it, isn't there?
There will come a normalization period where you take a step back, and this is probably happening now, and go, right, we've done that. We've kind of proved really that technology works. And let's not say that, for a second that Mandalorian looks rubbish because of the volume, because it doesn't. Because even was it like the 4th episode of season 1, where in the hangar and stuff like that, it just looks really, really good. It's just one of those things where you have to look at it and go, what's the availability? What's the lead time? What's the practicality of doing all this? And potentially, what's the flexibility for not only booking the resource, i.e., like a soundstage A free, or is the volume free on a particular week or month? But also, you look at how Gareth Edwards used to film Rogue One. He liked these 360-degree sets, so he could just be in it, and he could literally just film and just be reactive with the camera to what's going on. There's pros and cons with all of that. How big a set do you build? How much is that going to cost? How much time is that going to take to build? And then if you were to then decide later on, or actually, no, we don't want it to be on a desert planet. We've changed it now. It's on a snowy planet.
Yeah.
That feels like that could be something easier to potentially change in a volume with CGI than it would be maybe to have to then repaint and reskin a whole set, for example. So, I suppose that's what you got to look at. You got to look at the practical kind of aspects of why you want to do one versus the other. I mean, I've worked with directors, and that sometimes it just comes down to they just want to do it that way. It may not be the easiest way, or it may not be the hardest way. They're just that's what I want to try, because they're creative, that's their intent, and they are also the director. And part of that will be, that's what you want to do. You want to give the tools to the director in a way that they can use them easily without having to spend too much time thinking about it, and allow them to tell the story that they want to tell.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
So back in May, Fantha Tracks went up to Blackburn Ewood Park Football Club to Star Wars Fan Fun Day. There was a dozen guests there. We spoke to 9 of them. Some are already out there on Fantha Tracks TV, and some have already been on episodes of Making Tracks. And here's the latest one. It's with John Fensome. John was TC14 in The Phantom Menace. So here's myself and John sitting and having a chat in the year that Phantom celebrates its 25th anniversary at Star Wars Fan Fun Day.
So we're here at Blackburn Football Club. We're looking out on the pitch. I'm here with John Fensome. How is your show going so far?
No, it's really well. It's you never know, and but this show It's my second one.
Yeah.
My first one was in 2017, and that was the 2-day one, which I don't think they did too many of.
No, they just did the one, I believe.
And this one is, there's a lot of love in the room.
Yeah.
And it's and it is a family fun day.
Do you get out to many events?
Not too many. I've done, last one I did, wasn't this, I did about a year and a half ago in Wales Comic Con.
Right.
But yeah, so I don't do too many. But this one, you go to some of the bigger ones and it's all great and nice meeting people and all that kind of stuff. But this one is more touchy-feely.
Totally.
And more very dedicated fan base sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Which is lovely.
And I suppose as well, being the 25th anniversary, it's perfectly timed for you to get out, meet people and talk about it.
Yeah, and there's a lot more love for Phantom Menace now. So the generation that grew up, which is their trilogy, there's a lot more love, and time is a great healer. So people's initial disappointment, people go, oh, actually, it's not so bad. But there's a lot more love for them now. Yeah. And it's just bonkers. It's bonkers it was 25 years ago. It's bonkers that it was 27 years ago.
I was going to say, 97 you filmed it, didn't you?
Yeah. So that's a bit bonkers. I was 18. Yeah.
How did it come to you? How did this roll along for you?
So my background was creature effects, makeup effects.
Yeah.
I'd done a few feature films. One, I'd worked with John Coppinger before.
Yeah.
We did The Fifth Element together, and then we ended up on Phantom Menace, and so I'd done work with Nick Dudman a number of times.
Yeah.
So he brought us on, and then on the first day of pre-production that we came in, we had a little tour of Leavesden and what we were doing, and then there was a wall of characters. Yeah. And he said some of you are going to be in these. Yeah. Just to, I don't know why, because I'm sure they could afford to put any person in there.
Yeah.
And then one of them was this protocol droid, originally called TC3.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, we're going to have that character. Has a few lines. We don't know who's in that yet. And I was like, okay, I might be interested in that. Yeah. And then, and it came from there. So everybody else was starting to get little roles and things like that. And we started getting shipping containers from Skywalker Archive. Right. For references of the old creatures, as well as we were getting all the R2 units, bits of C-3PO, and various other bits and bobs, which is bonkers. I grew up with the film, so coming up face to face with these things was just bonkers. Yeah. And there was bits of protocol droid coming through. Yeah. So I'd occasionally try a little bit of body part on me, the arms and stuff like that, and then I said, "Ooh, can I have a go?" And fitted me perfectly, and that was history.
And how did you feel finding? Because there's a very specific movement to a protocol droid. So how did you finding that, if that makes sense?
You get a little bit of help from the costume itself.
Yes, pinch points and such.
Yeah, and it's pretty hard rubber pants you have on, so it's pretty restrictive. And then, we'd get the videos at the time, VHS. Yeah. And I'd go up and down and they'd film me, and there we go.
An enjoyable experience.
Yeah, I mean, I was 18. There was a lot of naivety. It was like, this is amazing. Look back now, and there was like youthful naivety there on this. If I did it now, I mean, I still work in the film industry, but if I was on a Star Wars set, everybody looking at me, George directing you, hitting your marks, you with Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor amongst others. Yeah, it was pretty bonkers.
You might overthink it now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you say, I mean, obviously it's more or better regarded now than it was then. We've had a lot of Star Wars between Phantom Menace and now. Why do you think, other than the fact that, as you say, it was a generation's Star Wars, like A New Hope was mine, and the special editions was a big deal. This is like the special editions for kids who came up with that. Why do you think it's better regarded now?
I think it is because of that. I think it is because there's the generation that grew up with it are sort of coming of age. Yeah. I think there's and like the original fans probably connected with their children,
Yes.
grew up with them,
Yeah.
and that's another way of connection, and there's a more warmth there.
Yeah.
Like I spoke to a father and son, and they said, well, we bond over watching Star Wars, and the chap who grew up with the prequels said that, well, they're mine.
Yeah.
They're the ones I grew up, and
Yeah.
the originals were my dad's, and so I think there's more. I think everybody's memories and connections mature.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
As they go.
Yeah.
And then I think with the newer ones coming out, that's all fresh, and so there's moments of like, oh, it's not so good. And,
Yeah.
oh, I hark back to that bit. So I don't know, but I think it's the maturity of time passing has probably had something to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're still in the industry. What work have you done since Phantom Menace?
So I've sort of do all sorts of stuff, predominantly post-production.
Yeah.
I want to do some more directing stuff. So yeah, I've done. I work on all sorts of things. Other feature films, short films, promos, documentaries. Yeah.
But a great thing to have in your back pocket to say, I was TC13.
Yeah. No, it's and my relationship with it has matured a lot more now.
Yeah.
Because when it first came out and it didn't have the greatest of love, there was a bit like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But now I start feeling more appreciation for that experience and more appreciation connecting with other people that enjoy it now. So when you first do these things, it's a bit of a strange experience.
Sure.
But I've done it quite a few times now, and it is nice to just talk to people and just say, well, what's connected you with this? What is it about these films that you love, and coming to the events you love? And it is just, I mean, certainly after we've all been through pretty up and down traumatic few years with lockdowns and stuff, this is a great time for us all to reconnect on a human level. All humans, aren't we? And we've all had experience, and it's lovely that people want to ask me about my experience, and I'm happy to share, and I relive it. So we're all living it vicariously again.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we've connected. Yeah. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Definitely the lady of the moment, Leslye Headland, was speaking about all sorts of Star Wars related stuff, obviously about the Acolyte, which we've already delved into on this episode, but she did mention a Star Wars video game from the past that she would like to do something with, Knights of the Old Republic. She actually said, I've always wanted to explore a live-action version of the Knights of the Old Republic game and the character of Kreia. I think it would be a very interesting story to bring to life, start writing some emails, start crowdfunding. So she's kind of jokingly asking the audience to see if we can make this happen. George Lucas, as I remember, mentioned it on stage at Celebration 3 about a live-action Old Republic era story or film that obviously didn't come to anything. And there's been, since then, Star Wars The Old Republic video game, which has been going for 11 or 12 years now, still does tremendously well. Because we're in an era now of the Acolyte, Leslye Headland is the showrunner at the top of that, dominating everybody's thoughts in the Star Wars realm. And then she comes out and says, I'd really love to do something with Knights of the Old Republic. She's not saying she wants to direct it. She's not saying what specifically she'd like to do. She'd just like to see it and would like to be involved. She obviously knows the game. She's mentioning specifically a character from it. Do you think there's any reason from what we've seen of the first 2 episodes of Acolyte why she couldn't do it? Do you think she'd be suitable? Do you think she's just kind of having a bit of fun? It was with a Brazilian website called Omelette. Great name for a website. Do you think there's any more to this than just sort of speaking her thoughts?
She's kind of got the opportunity right now, in some respects, to kind of explore more of like an Old Republic KOTOR kind of vibe with what she's doing, I think. I would be interested to see what that would mean for live action TV. And it would be cool to bring back some of these characters, Revan and like Shatil San, about why into canon, really. And I'll be up for seeing it. So maybe this is a conversation that they're having in the back rooms with Kathy and Matt and Lucasfilm. Maybe that's something that's been spun off. Maybe that was part of her original pitch. And maybe that was one of those things that they kind of pivoted towards the High Republic because it's more prescient with Lucasfilm's kind of publishing program at the moment.
That's a really interesting thought, actually. I've never even considered that maybe she had this idea and thought, wow, this is the Old Republic story I've always wanted to tell. You had all of Project Luminous go to the ranch and spitball ideas, and it all develops as it does. And then by the time her thing has progressed, because we're coming out the back of the Skywalker saga, and somebody at Lucasfilm says, this would work really well in the High Republic era, whereas she's thinking not 2 centuries before or 1 century before. I'm thinking 3,000 years before. So I really want to do something with KOTOR.
Also, cast your mind back to, was it 2020, when they actually announced the Acolyte? The Acolyte logo that they created was far different to the one that we see in the series.
It's like a video game logo.
It's a video game logo with, like, very kind of literal, what looks like a lightsaber score halfway through it and stuff. It's more bold and that. And then we kind of come to this slightly more ornate feeling in the current logo. This might be one of these things that has happened throughout development. Maybe they hadn't even nailed down a specific time frame to begin with, and it wasn't until really we're like, well, let's create more synergy in between the franchise publishing program and the live action streaming stuff, because it's all symbiotic at this point now. Case in point, I just went and picked up a couple of like High Republic novels that I hadn't brought, which surely that's as a secondary byproduct of it, is what they want this show to do, is to kind of maybe get more readers to kind of actually go, viewers to actually go, let's check out the High Republic publishing. Let's see what that's about.
It makes sense in that High Republic's been in the book charts now, in the New York Times and other book charts for 3 years, getting on for 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's established in that sense. And obviously Marvel are running numerous spin-off comics, and some are Dark Horse now. So say IDW, they did it, but now Dark Horse are doing it. So there's all these other elements of the publishing world that are filling that out. And this is right at the end of that era. So they're live action detailing when that definitively stops and the next era begins, whatever that era will be called or whatever we consider that to be. I don't think they've firmed that up quite yet. But nevertheless, if she had the opportunity to go back, we've got James Mangold going back and doing a Dawn of the Jedi. I think Jedi Prime was the name that was bouncing around recently. Film way at the start when the first person senses the Force and does something about it. And you've got to assume that that film is going to move through time and tell you a chunk of time for that era. In fact, one of the guys that's working on season 2 of Andor, Bo Willimon, is working on that Dawn of the Jedi film with Mangold. And then you come all the way up to basically Acolyte in terms of canon live action or canon animation. To drop something, it's not anywhere near, it's way nearer the current time than it is back then, but you've dropped something in that Old Republic era. And in the same way that Filoni and Favreau have got that post-Jedi era, and it feels like nobody else is really going to step into that because that's their chunk of the Star Wars timeline. And High Republic's already been established by the Luminous guys and everybody else that's come in, and she has had this Acolyte era sort of not tacked on the end, that's not fair, but, added to the end of that era, maybe to do a Kota thing. And there's a huge amount of history. And she seems like the sort of writer and director and showrunner that would want to pull in as many aspects as possible. And there's a great cast of characters from that era that you could have as good guy, bad guy, locations, whatever. If the Acolyte works and there's a season 2 and she's established in the Star Wars realm and she's like, I want to do Knights of the Old Republic, and they go, well, look what he did with Acolyte. Yeah, go on, fill your boots.
Hi, it's John Jackson Miller, author of the new Star Wars The Living Force, and you're listening to Fantatrax.
So the Writers Guild of America, they have revealed the writing teams for season 2 of Star Wars Andor, which lands on Disney Plus in 2025. Don't know quite when. Many of the same people that wrote season 1 are back for season 2. Tony Gilroy's back. Bo Willimon, who we mentioned earlier, is working on Dawn of the Jedi. Dan Gilroy is back. Tom Bissell is the new name. He's writing the final 3 episodes of the second and final season. The one name from season 1 that's not been mentioned is Stephen Schiff. Not that many details have been revealed quite yet, but the point is all the people that made Andor season 1 work so well are back for season 2. They've finished filming it. ILM are working on the visual effects probably as we speak, and we're just waiting for it to be announced and get more news and info when it does. But for me, great news that it's the same people because they absolutely slam dunked season 1. What do you think? You think it's a good thing to have the same people back? Do you think it's of interest or of use to have new voices? They've not mentioned any directors yet. We don't know who's directed. But in terms of the writers, do you think it's a good thing that they've got the same team back?
I think it's a very good team. And I think it's a very good thing as well, because I think this kind of series, I think, needs to remain really consistent. They really nailed the tone of what they were trying to achieve. It's one of those odd things, really. It's news, but it's no news. It's good to know, but probably for the average person, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference who's writing it really until they shot it now. So at this point, it doesn't matter. It's like nothing we can do about it. If there was a really big controversial name or something attached to it, that would be quite interesting potentially. Could you be like, okay, what are they doing? But I think the way that they have blocked us out and how Tony Gilroy has said about season 2 is going to take these bigger time jumps, and I think that's when you need some consistent voices across the writing team that can be able to carry those time jumps forward, but yet it still feel familiar and it doesn't feel too disjointed.
In season 2, as you say, each 3-episode chunk is, I think, essentially a year in time, and then they step forward to the next year. So episodes 1, 2, and 3 are written by Tony Gilroy. Episodes 4, 5, and 6 are by Bo Willimon. Episodes 7, 8, and 9 are by Dan Gilroy. 10, 11, and 12 are written by Tom Bissell. So it's exactly as you said, they're blocking in those 3-episode chunks. But it's the same team that worked on season 1. So I think even though, yes, you're absolutely right, to the general Star Wars fan, it doesn't matter one iota who's written them. When it actually comes out and the proof's in the pudding, when you can look back and go, well, that's the dude that wrote Rick's Road, that's the dude that wrote Announcement, or whatever it was. There's that tangible connection to the first season that works so well, isn't it?
So when you think that Bo's doing a block of 3, and he was the one who wrote the 1905 Prisoner Escape, then you start to think, well, is this where we maybe catch up with Malchi, who we know is in Rogue One? Also, we've got fan favorite Kino Loy, who we don't know his fate, whether or not he was able to get off the planet or, even out of the prison. So you could go like, okay, if you were to pass with your different episode blocks and see who's done that. But then like Tony Gilroy, and I think oversaw everything as well in terms of like he had writing credits on bits and bobs and stuff. Obviously, he's the one who's really shepherded the whole tone of this anyway. Extra confirmation of what's going on and that things are moving in the right direction, which is basically that it appears on our TV screens.
Exactly. And just to say, you mentioned Melchi. Last week's episode, we had Duncan Powers, our guest here on Making Tracks. So go back and listen to that if you haven't already. He can't talk about season 2, but he just kind of say he thinks it's rather cool because the makeup people thought it was rather cool. Then who's going to argue with the makeup people?
Well, everybody, that is all we have got time for this week's episode of Making Tracks. So thank you very much for listening. No listener's question, unfortunately, but if you actually have one that you're burning to release to the world and don't want to put it on X or on social media, then send it to these 2 idiots and we'll talk about it, and then you can call us idiots instead. So, Mark, can you let everybody know how they can do it?
I'll try in my best idiot fashion.
Visit fanthatracks.com or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom Down Under, Planet Layer, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely so no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
And that's me done for this episode.
Epic. Brilliant. Nice one, dude. Thank you very much. We will be back for episode 3 Acolyte reaction chat. So all that is left for me to say until then is thank you very much. Have a fantastic Star Wars week, whatever that means to you. And until the next time, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.